didn't read the newspapers, or he would have known that trouble was brewing for every dog, from Puget Sound to San Diego, because men in the Arctic darkness had found a yellow metal. Gold. Overnight, thousands of men rushed into the northland. And these men wanted dogs, heavy dogs, with hard muscles, furry coats, to protect them from the frost. Buck was born in a big house in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley of California, Judge Miller's place. There were great stables, rows of servants' cottages, and green pastures. This is where Buck lived. Here, for the 4 years of his life, he ruled. There were other dogs, but they didn't count. During the 4 years since his puppyhood, he lived the life of a sated aristocrat. The whole realm was his. Plunged into the swimming pool with the judge's sons, escorted the judge's daughters on early morning rambles, and on winter nights curled up at the judge's feet. See, Buck's father, Elmo, a huge St. Bernard, was the judge's inseparable companion. Buck's 140 pounds carried the dignity that comes with good living and universal respect. This was Buck's life. In the fall of 1897, when the discovery of gold in the Klondike dragged men from all over the planet to the frozen world of the North. Buck didn't read newspapers, and he didn't know that Manuel, one of the gardener's helpers, whom he thought a friend, was scheming against him. Manuel had a gambling problem. He lost, and he lost often. The night of Manuel's treachery, the judge was out at a meeting of the Raisin Growers Association. The boys were off playing football with their friends. No one was there. When Manuel attached a rope to Buck's collar and led him off into the orchard. That's when Buck first heard the voice of the man in the red sweater. You might wrap up the goods before you deliver them. That's it, boy. You're coming with me now. In quick range, Buck sprang at the man. Run, 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 run. To his surprise, the rope tightened, shutting off his breath. Ah, watch it there, boy. I'll choke you down to the ground. You never had a rope around your neck, see? I'm the one in charge. Now help me here, Manuel. We gotta get him down to the station. Crane him up! Toss him in a baggage car! Buck lay there for the remainder of the weary night, nursing the wrath that boiled in his heart. What do they want with me? Why are they keeping me in this terrible crate? The train car shook the entire night. Every time he heard the door rattle, he expected the judge or one of the boys. But each time, it was the bulging face of the man in the red sweater. For 2 nights, Buck neither ate nor drank. And during those 2 nights of torment, he accumulated a fund of wrath that boded ill for whoever first fell foul of him. In Seattle, 4 men carried his crate from the wagon into a small, high-walled backyard. Buck saw the man in the red sweater and hurled himself against the bars. The man smiled grimly and retrieved a hatchet and a club. You ain't gonna take him out now? The driver asked. Sure I am. The The man in the red sweater brought down the hatchet, breaking open the crate. Buck was ready. Hair bristling, mouth foaming, mad glitter in his bloodshot eyes. He launched his 140 pounds of fury straight at the man. In midair, just as his jaws were about to snap shut, he received a shock that checked his body and brought his teeth together with an agonizing clip. Buck had never been struck by a club. He didn't understand. He staggered limply about, blood flowing from his mouth and ears. With a roar like a lion, he charged again. But the man shifted and caught him under the jaw. Buck described a complete circle in the air and came crashing down on his head and chest. Answers to the name of Buck, the man soliloquized, quoting from the letter which announced the consignment of the crate and contents. Well, Buck, my boy, seems we've had our little ration. It's best you let it go at that. You've learned your place, and I know mine. Be a good dog, all will go well, goose hang high. Be a bad dog, and I'll whale the stuffing out of you. You understand? Buck was beaten. He knew that. He knew he stood no chance against a man with a club. He learned the lesson and would never forget it. That club was a revelation. An introduction to the reign of primitive law. As the days went by, other dogs came in crates and at the ends of ropes. One and all, Buck saw them pass under the dominion of the man in the red sweater. His time came in the form of a little weazened man who spoke broken English and many strange and uncouth exclamations, which Buck could not understand. That one good dang dog. How much he be? 300. But seeing how it's government money, you ain't got nothing to worry about, Perrault grinned. Considering price of dogs booming, Canadian government for whom we work, delivering mail, be no loser. Perrault knew dogs, yeah. And when he looked at Buck, he knew 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000. Buck saw money pass between them and was not surprised when another dog, Curly, a good-natured Newfoundland, was led away with them. That was the last he saw of the man in the red sweater. And the last time he would ever feel the warmth of the southern sun. They were taken to the boat, Narwhal, where they were introduced to Perrault's partner, Francois. Buck learned quickly that Perrault and Francois were fair men and too wise in the ways of the north to be fooled by dogs. Day and night, the narwhal throbbed to the pulse of the propeller. And though one day was very much like another, it was apparent to Buck that the weather was steadily growing colder. One morning, the propeller stopped, and the whole ship filled with excitement. Francois brought Buck up to his main deck, and his feet sank into a white, mushy something. Sort of like mud. He sprang back with a snort. More of this white stuff was falling through the air. He shook himself, but more fell on him. He sniffed on, sniffed it curiously, and licked up some on his tongue. It bit like fire, and the next instant was gone. Buck was confused. And Francois gave a chuckle. It was his first snow. Buck's first day on the Daya Beach was a nightmare. Every hour filled with shock and surprise. These men and dogs were savages. We'd never seen dogs fight as wolfish creatures fought. Curly, his only friend, was the first victim. They were camped near the log store when Curly, in her friendly way, made advances towards a husky dog the size of a full-grown wolf. He was larger, stronger, mean and menacing every muscle. His name was Spitz. Curly only sniffed up to say hello. There was no warning. Like a wolf who fights by striking and leaping away, Spitz attacked Curly again and again. Arr! 30 or 40 huskies ran to the spot and surrounded the combatants in an intent and silent circle, licking their chops. In a final move to save her life, Curly rushed Spitz, who struck her again, knocking her to the ground. Arr! This is what the huskies were waiting for. They closed in on Curly, snarling and yelping, until she was buried, screaming with agony, beneath the mass of dogs. Francois jumped in, swinging an axe. Get gone now, you dang dogs! I'll bust you up good jumping in like that! You lazy cowards! Every one of you! The dogs scattered. Buck saw Curly, his only friend, laying there, limp and lifeless, with a bloody, trampled snow. The scene often came back to Buck to trouble him in his sleep. So that is the way. No fair play. Once down, that's the end of you. He would see to it he would never go down. In his mind, he saw Spitz run his scarlet tongue out in the way he had of laughing. In that moment, Buck hated him with a bitter and deathless hatred. Before he had a chance to recover from the shock of Curly's death, Buck received another shock. Francois fastened him with an odd set of straps and buckles. Now there, Buck! Let me get it on you. Get used to it quicker than spit. It was a harness, such as he had seen the grooms put on the horses at home. It's what we call the traces. Be your best friend from here on out. Buck didn't mind the work, gave him purpose. Their first job was to haul Francois on a sled to a forest that fringed the valley and return with a load of firewood. Buck's team kept him in line. Closest to the sled, Dave, an experienced wheeler who nipped the back of Buck's legs when he was in error. Spitz was the experienced leader out front. He cunningly threw his weight in the traces to jerk Buck in the way he should go. Buck learned quickly under the tuition of his mates and made easy progress. He learned to stop at ho, to go ahead at push, to swing wide in the bends, and to stay clear of the wheeler when the loaded sled shot downhill at their heels. That night, Buck faced the great problem of sleeping. His owner's tent glowed warmly. And when he tried to sneak in, both Perrault and Francois bombarded him with curses and cooking utensils. "Get out, you mangling mot!" Buck lay down on the snow to sleep, but the frost drove him shivering to his feet. Miserable, he wandered around the many tents. Here and there, savage dogs would rush him. He bristled his hair and snarled. Finally, an idea came to him. He would see how his teammates were making out. To his astonishment, they disappeared. With a drooping tail and shivering body, Buck aimlessly circled the tent. Suddenly, the snow gave way beneath his legs, and he sank down. Something wriggled under his feet. He sprang back. A friendly little yelp reassured him, and he went back to investigate. A whiff of warm air ascended to his nostrils, and there, under the snow, in a snug ball, lay Billy! So that's the way they did it, eh? Buck confidently selected a spot, and with much fuss, dug a hole for himself. Come morning, he didn't know where he was. It had snowed during the night, and he was completely buried. All the muscles in his body contracted, and he bounded straight up to his feet. See what I say? What I tell you is that Buck learned quick as anything. It was a hard day's run. Up the cannon, through sheep camp, past the scales and timberline, across glaciers and snowdrifts, hundreds of feet deep. Day after day, Buck toiled in the traces. His development was rapid. His muscles became hard as iron. He could eat anything, no matter how vile. Not only did he learn by experience, but instincts, long dead, became alive again. The domesticated generations fell from him. He could feel his ancestors in his bones. On the still, cold nights, he pointed his nose at a star and howled, long and wolf-like. It was his ancestors, dead in dust, howling down through the centuries, through him. All this because men had found a yellow metal in the north. And because Manuel was a gardener's helper, couldn't pay his debts. Dominant primordial beast was strong in Buck, and under the fierce conditions of trail life, it grew. At Lake LaBarge, darkness forced them to grope for a camping place. They couldn't have fared any worse. Perrault and Francois spread out their sleeping bags on the ice of the lake itself. Buck made his nest. So warm and snug was it, he was loath to leave it when Francois distributed the fish. The thermometer reached 50 below, and a dozen times they nearly froze when the ice broke, plunging them into the freezing water. Perrault's skill at quickly building fire was the only thing to save them. Buck's feet were not as hard and compact as the feet of the huskies. They had softened during the many generations since his last wild ancestor was tamed by a cave dweller. All day long he limped in agony. Hungry as he was, he couldn't move to receive his ration of fish. Francois rubbed Buck's feet and made them set 4 little moccasins. Francois Perrault laughed one morning, forgetting moccasin, find Buck laying on back, waving feet in air, calling for food. They eventually wore out, and Buck's feet grew hard on the trail. It was inevitable that the clash of leadership between Spitz and Buck should come. They pulled into Dawson one dreary afternoon with the great fight still to come. Here were many men and many dogs. And Buck found them all at work. All day long they swept up and down the main street in long teams. And every night, with the aurora borealis flaming coldly overhead, the dogs lifted a nocturnal song. It was a song as old as the breed itself. One of the first songs of the younger world, invested with the woe of unnumbered generations. Buck moaned and sobbed, the same pain as his ancestors. The fear of dark and cold in him harked back through the ages of fire and roof to the raw beginnings of life. After 7 days in Dawson, the team turned around, pulled back up the Yukon Trail, and headed back toward Dial with a new batch of mail. One night, after supper, Dub turned up a snowshoe rabbit. The whole team took off after it. The rabbit sped down the river. Buck was ranging at the head of the pack, running the wild thing down. There is an ecstasy that marks the summit of life. It comes to the artist in a sheet of flame. It comes to the soldier, war mad on the stricken field. And it came to Buck, leading the wolf pack, sounding the old wolf cry, straining after the food that was alive, and fled swiftly before him through the moonlight.
Spitz, cold and calculating, left the pack and cut across a narrow neck of land where the creek made a long bend around.
Buck didn't notice. And when he rounded the bend, he saw the frosty breath of the rabbit still flitting before him. He saw another, larger frost wraith leap from the overhanging bank into the immediate path of the rabbit. It was Spitz. The full pack at Buck's heels raised a hell's chorus of delight. Buck did not cry out. He did not check himself. He drove in upon Spitz, shoulder to shoulder, so hard, he missed the throat. For Curly, he thought, to the death. They rolled over and over in the powdery snow. Spitz gained his feet, slashed Buck across the shoulder. As they circled about, the scene came to Buck with a sense of familiarity. He seemed to remember it all. The white woods, the moonlight, the thrill of battle. Fang clashed fang. Lips were cut and bleeding. He enveloped Spitz in a whirlwind of rushes. Time and time again, he tried for the snow-white throat, and every time, Spitz slashed him and got away. Spitz was untouched. Buck was streaming with blood and panting hard. The fight grew desperate. All the while, the silent, wolfish circle waited to finish off whichever dog went down. Buck fought by instinct, but he could use his head as well. He possessed a quality made for greatness: imagination. He rushed, as if attempting the old shoulder trick, but at the last instant swept low to the snow and in. Teeth closed around Spitz's left foreleg, the crunch of breaking bone. Spitz struggled madly to keep up. There was no hope for him. Buck maneuvered for the final rush. He struck. The circle became a dot on the moon-flooded snow as Spitz disappeared from view. Buck stood and looked on. The successful champion, the dominant primordial beast, had made his kill. He found it good. Eh? What I say? Huh? I speak true when I say, "Dad, Buck, 2 devils!" This was Francois' speech the next morning when he discovered Spitz missing and Buck covered in wounds. "Did Spitz fight like hell?" said Perrault as he surveyed the gaping rips and cuts. "But that Buck fight like 2 hells," was Francois' answer. "And now we make good time, huh? No more Spitz, no more trouble for sure, ah!" While Perrault packed the camp and loaded the sled, Francois harnessed the dogs. There was no place for Buck, save the front. The tone of the team picked up immediately. It recovered its old-time solidarity, and once more the dogs leapt as one in the traces. "Never such a dog as that Buck!" cried Francois. "Him worth $1,000, my girl!" Buck felt his instincts, the habits of his ancestors, become alive again. In one run, they made a 60-mile dash from the foot of Lake LaBarge to the White Horse Rapids. And on the last night, they dropped down the sea slope with the lights of Skagway at their feet. It was a record run, Each day for 14 days, they ran 40 miles. Perrault and Francois threw their chests up and down the main street and were deluged with invitations to drink. The team was the constant center of worship. Next came official orders. Francois threw his arms around Buck and wept. It was the last of Francois and Perrault. Like other men, they had moved out of Buck's life for good. 3 days passed in which Buck realized how weak he was. On the morning of the 4th day, 2 men from the States came along and bought them. Charles was middle-aged with watery eyes and a mustache that twisted up. Hal was 19 with a big Colt revolver and a hunting knife. Why they would adventure the north is a mystery that passes understanding. The new owner's camp was a slovenly affair. Tents half-stretched, dishes unwashed, everything in disorder. Buck saw a woman, Mercedes. He watched them load the sled. They haven't a clue, he thought. 2 men from a neighboring camp came out grinning. Not to tell you your business, but I wouldn't tote that tent along if I was you. Undreamed of. Ain't no hotels where you're going. Plenty of other things. Wolves, bears, toll the house. Well, I tell you what, you won't be laughing when we return with a wagon full of gold. Too bad you ain't got nowhere to put it. The men left, chuckling off to the bar. Hal took his spot. On the sled. Mush! Mush on there! The dogs sprang against the breastbands. The overloaded sled wouldn't budge. Now, I don't give a whoop what becomes of you, but for the dog's sake, you gotta break the sled out of the ice. Hal broke out the runners. And they forged ahead. Buck and his mates struggled against the rain of blows. 100 yards ahead, the path turned and sloped onto the main street. It would have required an experienced runner to keep the top-heavy sled upright. Hal wasn't it, Buck thought. Buck swung extra wide to the right. The sled went over, spilling half its contents. Buck was ranging. He broke off into a run, the rest of the team behind. Hal was pulled off his feet. He shouted for them to about to listen, he ran the sled right over Hal. And as the dogs tore down the street, dragging the overturned sled, the streets of Skagway burst into laughter. In the nature of Arctic travel, there's a reason why 14 dogs should not drag along one sled. One sled cannot carry enough food for 14 dogs. Buck knew there's no depending on these people. Some nights, they didn't make 10 miles. Other nights, they didn't get started at all. It was inevitable they'd go short on food. Not only did they not know how to work dogs, Buck mused, they don't know how to work themselves. Charles and Hal would wrangle whenever Mercedes gave them a chance. They each believed they did more of the work. In the meantime, the fire remained unbuilt, camp half-pitched, dogs unfed. They were worn out and worn down. Buck's 150 pounds, whittled down to 115. And this was the state of Buck's team the day I first laid eyes on them. It was beautiful spring weather, though neither the dogs nor the humans were aware of it. Each day, the sun rose earlier, set later. All things were thawing, bending, snapping. The Yukon was breaking loose from the cold that bound it. And amid this awakening life, like wayfarers to death, staggered the men, women, and huskies into my camp. I was whittling the last touches of an axe handle I'd started from a branch of birch. Hal did all the talking. They told us that the trail would bottom out and the best thing we could do is lay over, that we wouldn't make it to White River, but here we are. What they had been told was true. The trail would bottom out at any moment. Only fools, with the blind luck of fools, could have made it. I wouldn't risk my carcass on that ice for all the gold in Alaska. All the same, we're going on to Dawson. I watched as Hal commanded the team to get on with it. He struck with his whip. Buck didn't budge. So greatly had he suffered. So far had he gone. The blows didn't hurt him much. The spark of life in him flickered. In what he thought his last moments on this earth, Buck heard a man's voice. My voice. Cry out for it. Ah! Hal was hurled backward. Mercedes screamed. Charles didn't dare try me. I stood over Buck, too convulsed with rage to speak. You strike that dog again, I'll kill you. It's my dog! Hal drew his knife. I whacked his hand with the axe handle. He dropped that knife real quick. I whacked his hand again when he tried to pick it up. In 2 quick strokes, I cut Buck from the traces. He knew then he belonged to them no more. A few minutes later, they pulled back up the bank, headed down the river. Buck heard them go, raised his head to see. Dog and man, we watched them crawling over the ice. Suddenly, the back of the sled went down, as if into a rut. Mercedes screamed. Charles took one step, tried to run, and the whole section of ice gave way. They disappeared. A yawning hole was all that was to be seen. The trail had bottomed out. Buck watched as his team, his sled, and those insufferable people vanished into the icy river. I looked at him. He looked at me. Poor devil. My name is John Thornton. I'd come up the previous December. Buck's wounds healed. His muscles swole out, and the flesh came back to cover his bones. Buck grew to love me. I grew to love him. Buck had a trick. He would seize my hand in his jaws and close it, so that my flesh bore the imprint of his teeth, an expression of love. Kind of hurt. Buck feared he would lose me, like the other masters that had come before. Sometimes at night, he'd knelt at the foot of my tent, listen to me breathe. From the depths of the forest, a call was sounding. Buck felt compelled to plunge after it. But as often as he turned to leave, it was the bond he shared with me that brought him back. Buck would answer that call, but not before he sealed his reputation as the most famous dog in the whole history of Alaska. The El Dorado Saloon was a place where men boasted of their favorite dogs. Buck was talked about a lot. A drunk claimed his dog could start a sled with 500 pounds. My boy can pull 6 in a lick. Hell, mine can pull 7. Being well beyond my first drink of the evening. Boom! Boom! Buck can start 1,000 pounds. Unfortunately, this caught the ear of a man with money, a king of the bonanza mine named Doc Mathewson. And break it out. And walk with it for 100 yards. And break it out and walk with it for 100 yards, I responded without stopping to think. Well, so that the entire bar could hear. I've got $1,000 that says he can't. And here it is, slapping down a sack of gold dust the size of a bologna sausage. He called my bluff. I didn't know if Buck could start 1,000 pounds. And I've got a sled outside now with 20, 50-pound sacks of flour on it. Well, I didn't know what to say. Mason, Jim O'Brien. Mastodon King, old friend, caught my eye.
Lend me 1,000?
I mouthed, barely a whisper. Sure, was his answer, thumping down a sack of gold next to Mathewson's. But it's little faith I'm having, John, that the beast can do the trick. The Eldorado emptied its occupants into the street to see the test. Several hundred men, furred and mittened, gathered around Mathewson's sled, piled high with 1,000 pounds of flour. In the 60 below, intense cold, the runners were frozen fast. Men offered odds, 2 to 1, Buck can't even budge the sled. Buck could feel the excitement in the air. He knew he must do a great thing for me. He was in perfect condition. His coat shone with the sheen of silk. Men felt his muscles, hard as iron.
Gad, sir! Gad, sir!
Stuttered a member of the latest dynasty, the king of the Skookum benches. I'll give you 800 for him, sir. 800! Before the test! 800 just as he stands! The crowd fell silent. I knelt down beside Buck, his head in my hands. As you love me, Buck. As you love me. He seized my hand in his jaws. It was his answer, in terms not of speech, but love. Now, Buck. Buck, tighten the traces, and then slack them for a matter of several inches in the way he had learned. Buck turned wide to the right. The load quivered, and from under the runners was heard a crisp crackling. Haul! The crackling became a snapping as the sled pivoted and the runners sliding and grating several inches to the side. Men unconsciously held their breath. All right. Now, march! Buck threw himself forward. The sled swayed and trembled. One of his feet slipped. A man groaned aloud. And then the sled began to lurch forward in a rapid succession of jerks. Half an inch, 2 inches. And then, gaining momentum, the sled moved steadily along. Men gasped and began to breathe again. I ran behind shouting encouragement. And as the sled reached the pile of firewood that marked the end of 100 yards, a cheer began to rise and burst into a roar as the sled passed the firewood and halted at command. Men threw themselves loose, even Mathewson, hats and mittens thrown into the air, men shaking hands, it didn't matter with whom. I fell to my knees beside Buck, head against head.
Gad, sir! Gad, sir!
Spluttered the king of the Skookum benches. I'll give you 1,000 for him, sir. 1,000, sir. 1,200, sir. I looked at him in the eyes. Tears streaming down my cheeks. Sir, you can go to hell. Sir, best I can do for you, sir. I reached down my hand. Buck seized it in his teeth, like he'd done so many times before. I shook him. That's my boy, Buck. That's my boy. Adventure grows deep in a man's heart. just as Buck heard his call deep in the forest. I heard mine. When Buck made $1,600 in 5 minutes, my heart pointed east on an unknown trail. Spring came on once more. We found a place across a valley where the gold showed like yellow butter. Each day we worked earned us thousands of dollars. We bagged the gold in moosehide sacks, 50 pounds each. Piled it up like firewood, like giants. We heaped the treasure up. Buck spent long hours musing by the fire. The call, sounding deep in the forest, filled him with strange desires. One night, he sprung from asleep. From the forest, distinct and definite. Buck sprang through the sleeping camp, dashed through the woods, and came upon an open place among the trees. He saw a long, lean timber wolf. The wolf fled. Buck followed and ran him into a blind channel where the timber jam barred the way. The wolf whirled about. Buck didn't attack, but circled in friendly advances. The wolf was suspicious. Buck weighed 3 times as much. He made it clear to Buck to come, and they ran, side by side, through the moonlight, back up the creek bed, across the great divide. Buck was ecstatic. Old memories were stirring. He had done this thing before. His cunning was wolf cunning, his intelligence, St. Bernard intelligence, all this plus experience in the fiercest of schools made him as formidable a creature as any that roamed the wild. As fall came, the moose appeared. A band of 20 made it across, and chief among them, a great bull. From the bull's side, a feathered arrow accounted for his savageness. There was no way for Buck to know. He was not the only one hunting this great beast. Guided by primordial instinct, Buck cut the bull from the herd. For half a day, Buck multiplied himself, attacking from all sides, enveloping the herd in a whirlwind of rushes. Buck never left his prey, never gave it a moment's rest, never let the great bull quench his burning thirst at the streams they crossed. As twilight fell, the old bull stood with lowered head. In the end, death came at the teeth of a creature who did not reach beyond his great buckling knees. The end came quick for us. I wasn't alive to see Buck return from bringing the big moose down. As he came back to camp, Buck sensed something was wrong. 3 miles out, he came upon a fresh scent that brought the hair on his neck bristling. On the trail, he found one of his partners, a sled dog, dead, an arrow protruding, head and feathers from either side of his body. From the camp, the faint sound of voices, rising and falling in a chant. Bellowing forward to the edge of the clearing, he found a miner lying face down, feathered with arrows like a porcupine. A gust of overpowering rage swept over. The Yeehats were dancing about the wreckage of our camp when they heard a roar and saw rushing upon them an animal like they'd never seen before. Buck sprang at the chief. He slit his throat until his jugular spouted a fountain of blood. There was no withstanding him. He plunged about, rending, tearing,
destroying in constant and terrific motion.
There was no withstanding him. Buck was so fast, and the Indians so close together, they shot each other with their own arrows. A young hunter hurled a spear at Buck and went through the chest of another hunter with so much force, the point broke out the back. Panic seized the Yeehats, and they fled in terror through the woods, proclaiming the birth of an evil spirit.
Buck was the fiend incarnate, bringing them down like deer running at their heels, chasing them through the woods.
Fateful day for the Yeehats. They fled far and wide over the country. It wasn't until a week later the last of the survivors gathered together in the lower valley to count their losses. Buck returned to camp. My own desperate struggle was fresh written on the earth. Buck scented every detail of it. Down to the edge of a deep pool. In the water, muddy and discolored from the sluice boxes from which we had pulled so much gold. We found my body. It left a great void in him. He had killed man, noblest of all game, but it was love that tore him most. Night came on, and a full moon rose over the trees. In the distance, a faint, sharp yelp. Buck moved to the center of the clearing and listened. It was the many-noted call, more alluring and compelling than ever before. I was gone. The last tie broken. Man and the claims of men no longer bound him. Into the moonlit clearing, the wolf pack flooded in a silvery flood. In the middle of the clearing stood Buck, motionless as a statue. They were awed, so still and large he stood. One wolf, long, lean, and gray, advanced cautiously. Buck recognized him as the wild brother with whom he had run a night and a day. He whined softly, and when Buck whined, they touched noses. Then an old gray wolf, battle-scarred and gaunt, came forward. Buck writhed his lips into the start of a snarl, but the old gray wolf knelt down, pointed nose at the moon, and broke out the long wolf howl. And it came to Buck in unmistakable accents. The leaders lifted the yelp of the pack and sprang through the woods. The wolves swung in behind, yelping in chorus, and Buck ran with them, side by side, the wild brother howling as he ran. Ah! Here may well end the story of Buck. The years were not many when the Yeehats noticed a change in the breed of timberwolf, for some were seen with brown on head and muzzle, and a rift of white down the center. The Yeehats tell of a ghost dog. They're afraid of him, for he has cunning greater than they. But he is not always alone. For when the long winter nights come on, he can be seen running at the head of the pack, leaping gigantic above his fellows, his great throat a bellow, singing the song of the younger world, call of wild.